I'm David Fairman, and I'm going to be the MC today. And I want to just, because we have so much to do and so much to celebrate, I think we should kick it off. And I want to invite Jean Molino, who's the chair of the Convergence Board, to get us started. So Jean, whenever you're ready, please go ahead. And then may I just ask folks at this point to go ahead and mute yourselves so that we can focus on the folks who are going to be speaking. Thanks so much.
Thank you, David, and an official welcome to everyone and greetings from Short Hills, New Jersey. I am so delighted to have all of you with us today to celebrate our friend and Convergence founder, Rob Fersh. And hello, of course, to you, Rob, as well. Good to have you too. As I think all of you can appreciate, celebrations can be a little bit tricky, a little challenging in this day of COVID. But it was so clear to us that so many of us, so many of you wanted to find a way to honor Rob's extraordinary vision and leadership and to express to Rob our admiration and our affection and our thanks. And so here we are with this Zoom celebration. I think the team's pulled something pretty wonderful together. So I'd like to thank them at the outset for that. And of course, thank all of you for participating as well. Now, I expect there's going to be a fair bit of how did we each get to meet Rob and be introduced to Rob and to Convergence. Maybe not for all you family members, but for others here. And allow me to be the first on that score, and I promise to be brief. I first met Rob probably close to 9 years ago now at a lunch at a restaurant in New York City. There were a number of Convergence people at that lunch. The connection was a mutual friend of mine and Rich Korn's. Rich, as everybody knows, is the former chair of the board of Convergence and a dear friend of the organization and of Rob, and you'll hear from Rich in a little bit. And the short version of that experience for me was that I was so immediately taken with the mission of this organization. I just found it compelling, urgently important. And that was 9 years ago. You can imagine what I might say about that now. I found it very positive in its mindset and such. And in my experience, at least, a unique organization. I wasn't aware of any organization doing quite what Convergence does. So I was immediately taken with it. And at the same time, and I distinctly remember this, I remember being very impressed with Rob as a leader. And Rob, what I want to say about that is that even in that brief encounter 9 years ago, whenever it was, but consistently since then, in every interaction we've had, and I've been a member of the LC and a member of the board for many years, you have always exuded the kind of leadership that I most admire. And we know there are many kinds of effective leaders out there in the world today. But to me, that meant an open mind, but an open heart and genuine warmth and humility. I think a great sense of humor. Others may challenge that today. We'll have to wait and see, but I've enjoyed your sense of humor. And at the same time, just a laser focus on what matters and what's important and always keeping us true to the mission. And for me, you were as much a magnet 9 years ago, as was the tremendous vision that you developed for Convergence. I couldn't have imagined back then I'd be chairing the board now. That, of course, is my distinct honor and privilege. Now, the good news, as I think most people appreciate, is that Rob is not retiring or, sailing into the sunset or into the golf course or whatever your happy place is, Rob. Rob will remain a senior advisor to Convergence and a member of our board, for which I, and I know many, many people, are very, very grateful. What I would like to do now is formally introduce David Fairman. You heard from David briefly a moment ago. He will be our moderator today. David is the managing director of the Consensus Building Institute and an associate director of the MIT Harvard Public Disputes Program. David facilitates on complex public and organizational issues, both internationally and in the US, and has been the principal facilitator for a number of Convergence dialogues over the years. So in David, we have a true partner in our work and in fact, a member of our leadership council. So with that, David, let me now officially turn it over to you.
Jean, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for being here this afternoon to give Rob the tribute that he deserves. And I don't exactly know what that should be, but I guess we're all going to find out. And I want to say how delighted I am to have the chance to be your MC this afternoon. It's been a journey for me with Rob that started in the late 1990s. And I have had the great privilege to accompany him and be in awe of him as he took the vision of a national consensus building organization that would take on the toughest issues facing our society and turn it into a reality. And that is something that very few people get to say that they've done. And Rob has done it with such heart and such graciousness and such a kind of a Tom Sawyer ability to rope people in to help paint the fence and make it fun that I think there's everything to celebrate today. And I will say some more things about him later, but I want to now just say that today we had so many people who wanted to be able to speak and honor Rob and share their stories and give him a little ribbing. And we just had to figure out who to have in this program. So first we're going to hear from Akif Ahmad, and I'll say more about him and about Rob's daughter, Rachel Fersh, who will come next. Then after those two, we'll actually have a chance to go to breakout rooms, and Rob will visit you in your breakout group of a smaller number of people, and you'll have a chance there to recollect and share stories about Rob. Then we'll come back together and we'll hear from Rich Korn, as you heard from Jean, the former chair of the board of Convergence, and from Dusie, Cassata, who's a stalwart, essential member of the staff here. And then finally, of course, we'll hear from Rob himself, and then David Eisner, the new CEO at Convergence, will close the program. You had this program via email, and I think you were going to have it in the chat. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things. If you wouldn't mind, please do keep yourself muted during this conversation with the speakers, just so everyone can have a chance to hear them. On the other hand, please definitely feel free to use the chat to share your thoughts and recollections as we go. That's great. And if you've got any technical issues, please also use the chat to let us know if there's anything that the Convergence team can do to help you. We'll do our best to do that. So let me now bring it to Akif Ahmad. Akif is a co-founder of Convergence with Rob, was on the staff until 2016. He did really everything at Convergence, because when he joined, it was a pretty small shop. And among other things, very strategically helped with planning, strategic planning, and with fundraising for the organization. And I got to know I got to know Akif in the context of the project that we did together on US engagement with the Muslim world, and then in US Pakistan, the Leaders Forum that Convergence created. And he is a true gem in at least two senses. First, Akif will enthusiastically take on a task that everyone else thinks is basically not possible. So he and Rob were well matched in that. And second, a great, I think, partner for Rob in linking great vision with great strategy. So Akif, over to you. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Rachel took a bet the other day that I might exceed 3 minutes. She might win the bet. In 46 years of life, aside from immediate family, there's been a handful of people who've had a fundamentally transformative impact on the direction and the substance of my life. And Rob Fersh is one of those people. Credit goes to two things. One was a printed email, and the other was the disposition of a stoplight on Lee Highway on the morning of October 14, 2008, or thereabouts. And it was then that, while parked, I think it was on the corner of Lee Highway and Fort Myer Drive. And I was waiting to turn right, and then left and left again into the garage of my company, that I noticed this email printed sitting on the passenger seat of my car that read, "Changing course, a new direction for US relations in the Muslim world." And fortunately, the font size was large enough that I caught the location, Massachusetts Avenue. And so in that split second, where 999,000 times out of 1,000, I would have turned right and just gone about my day, I considered the open space on my calendar that morning, decided to play hooky from work, which I've never done, and went straight as the light turned green and navigated my way across Roosevelt Bridge to a parking spot near Johns Hopkins SICE and wandered in 40 minutes late to a panel where Rob and David were sitting and 2 other people, and there was this room full of individuals and the big board with lots of names of people you normally see on the news or read about. And they were talking about this thorny issue of how to improve US relations with the Muslim world. Well, that was my first introduction to the ideas behind Convergence. And about an hour or so into that morning was my first introduction to Rob. And, you know, as I was standing last in line of a long adulating queue of people, when it was my turn to shake his hand, I introduced myself and I thanked him for the remarkable effort. And at that moment, what I didn't realize was that I'd been unwittingly ensnared in Rob's invisible, warm, never will let you go web-like embrace. And he asked if I'd like to continue the conversation over lunch. And the next week we had lunch. And 3 hours into lunch, he asked if I'd like to come by and advise on one of the projects emanating from the Changing Course report. And that led to a series of meetings and phone calls. And somewhere in between there was a request for a donation, which I gladly conceded to without hesitation. And within a couple of months, I was seated at a chair at a desk in the offices of Search for Common Ground in DuPont Circle, working full days and weekends with no pay and enjoying every moment. And fast forward through 8 amazing, unexpected, and unpredictable years. And I look back proudly, not only at the institution of Convergence, which successfully has graduated from its entire founding group, I think at this point, to now be an institution. But I want to say this very specifically I'm quite proud of the changed person I am because of Rob. And this is where I'll close my comments. Because his impact and influence continues its multiplying and in my heart, virtuous effect. And I think will for the remainder of my days. I learned to build something from scratch with nothing more than idea, create a culture that attracted amazing people, resources, and commitment. I learned it's about the world of policy and government and nonprofits and how hard it is for that combination of lanes to work together, but can and yield great results. Rob, you taught me how to facilitate a meeting properly, which, I spend a lot of time in meetings. So that's a really good skill to have. But most of all, I learned resilience, found a new center, and matured in my understanding of how the world can work, not just the way it does work. And I genuinely learned, Rob, with not only how to work with non-like-minded people, but I learned what it meant to be empathetic and how unique is that person who can be empathetic all the time as a matter of character and habit. And so that is what you gave me and all the folks on this amazing call who I can call my friends, and on folks who aren't here today and whose path I was honored to cross and privileged to be a part of for the time that we were. I thank you for that. I'm a different and better person for knowing you. And as evidenced by the lots of people who are on this call today, I'm just one of many. So thank you.
Akif, thank you so much for that and for being such an articulate and generous toaster. I just want to add to your remarks that sense that Rob, I think truly never meets a person who he doesn't like and never meets a person who he doesn't think can somehow help. And that's a wonderful combination. We want to ask all of you for a minute. You've heard already Jean and Akif mentioned something about how they met Rob, and we have a hunch that there are a lot of how we met Rob stories to tell. So we're actually going to ask you to respond to a quick poll, which is about to pop up on the screen, asking you how you met Rob, and then we'll see what the options are, and we'll see what you have to say about it once we see the results. So if we could have that poll up, please take a minute. It should be obvious to you, I hope, in your Zoom how to fill it out. Yep, see people go into it. That's great. And I'm actually surprised that we don't have more people saying plane, train, bus, or automobile, because the way Rob tells it, most of the people who he meets that way, accosting them on public transportation. So we'll see if that actually proved true, or that's a little bit of Rob embellishment. We'll give it another few seconds because not everybody's completed it. Oh, this is coming out strikingly professional, actually, that Convergence turns out to be in the lead. It's kind of like watching the horses round the stretch to come into the home stretch. I'm kind of rooting for public transportation, but it's the dark horse now. And I see people already putting stuff in the chat, which is great. And please feel free to add to that. Okay, I think just for time, we're gonna leave it there and see that Rob has impressively recruited people through Convergence, but also has brought people in through so many other doors. And Rob, again, one of your gifts. Let me now bring it to one of Rob's children, his marvelous daughter Rachel, who has been given guidance that, this is meant to be a celebration of Rob, and I think we're confident in that. But daughters do know a lot about their dads. She is an attorney and a freelance consultant in Washington, D.C. She's working on the future of civic engagement and democracy in America, and we really hope she succeeds. And she's an active member of the Leadership Council and has been with Rob every step of the way. So Rachel, please. Thank you.
Thanks, David. I feel like I've known my dad my whole life. So when Convergence first approached my dad about the framework for this event, we heard that he asked for it to be a roast and toast, not just a tribute. And this tracks with his great sense of humor, which can be found somewhere at the intersection of Jewish self-deprecation and dad one-liners. It's for people who like their puns with a side of matzo ball soup. But when the organizers asked my mom and me for feedback, we replied that the toast was a great idea, but we weren't sure about the roast part. Because the truth is that, if you don't know this about my dad, he's someone who can take things personally. Now, when you say that someone takes things personally, it's often meant as a critique, that the person has thin skin or can't handle criticism. But as I thought about this, far from being a liability, I think the fact that my dad takes things personally, and really all things, is actually his superpower. Dad takes things personally in that he personally invests, he empathizes, he engages. He gives of himself, and he takes a genuine, unguarded, intimate interest. Everything is personal to my dad. His family, his friendships, his community, his sports teams, his spirituality, his conversations, and his golf game. And last but not least, his work. The foundational value, the essence of Convergence, is personal connection. That when you replace players jockeying on a board with people engaging around a table, competitors can become compatriots. There could be no better institutional representation of my dad. Groucho Marx once said that the secret of life is honesty and fair dealing. And if you can fake that, you've got it made. But here's the thing about my dad, and you all know this. He isn't faking it. Whether he agrees with you or not, he genuinely, deeply, thoroughly cares. I would venture a guess that 90+% of the people on this call can think of at least one time, probably many more, where my dad has reached out to you personally. It might have been work related. He knew that you had a specific opinion about a project or an issue, or totally separate, even if you met him through work. He wanted to check in about family or friends or life circumstances, to offer his congratulations, his condolences, or just to make a joke or a connection, or to tease or to reminisce. That's who my dad is. He takes all of you and life in general personally. Dad, I can see you. I'm grateful to have this opportunity to tell you how proud I am and how lucky I feel to be your daughter. You lead and incidentally parent with empathy, conviction, compassion, humility, integrity, and humor. These qualities have shaped your impressive career, and you have lovingly woven them into the underpinnings of Convergence. Yes, fine, you're often someone who takes things personally. But imagine what our world could be like if more people did the same. I love you, Papa, and you deserve this event. Congratulations.
Wow. Rachel, thank you so much.
Sorry, not so funny.
Much better than funny. I think your dad is smiling so much his heart might burst through his lips there, and we are grateful for you to remind us all of how deep that spirit of connection goes in Rob, how central to his being it is. Let us now give you a chance to actually talk with each other a little bit. We're going to take you into breakout rooms on Zoom, which most of you are familiar with, but basically you're going to go from this cast of 133 into a small group where you'll be able to see about a dozen people or so. And really it's just a chance to chat. You'll have a staff person with you who is just there to sort of toss out a few questions to get the ball rolling. And with a bit of luck, Rob will be able to visit just about everybody before we're done. So I think we'll have something shy of 20 minutes, more like 15 in these rooms. And I think whenever team you're ready to send us to them, you should go ahead. Thank everybody for sharing in those breakouts, and then invite you to mute yourselves again now that we're all back together. And we want to invite you also to put in the chat one thing that you learned, if you learned anything in your breakout about Rob or about the world, if you feel like that. And let's just continue. We've got more tributes to come. And our next is from Rich Korn, who chaired the Convergence Board of Directors from 2013 to 2018. Rich is an absolutely remarkable, insightful, generous, incisive thinker and coach for hundreds of organizations around the world, and has done such a fantastic job in helping Convergence grow organizationally, and has been a very close advisor for Rob and for others at Convergence. And I think, like many of us, has become more of a friend of Rob's than he might ever have imagined, and vice versa. But Rich, let me turn it to you. Thank you so much.
Thanks very much, David. It's absolutely a pleasure to see so many friends of Convergence. This is a real treat. I want to share with you a story about that Rob frequently shares about how we met. Dave Lipsky, who is on this call. Dave is a former Convergence board member and a dear friend of both Rob's and mine, as well as our mentor. And Dave invited me about 10 years ago to an informal dinner in New York City where Rob was going to talk about this nascent organization that he was just building. And Dave told Rob that he invited this rich guy who'd be attending the dinner. Apparently, Rob got very, very excited. When I got to the dinner and introduced myself, Rob realized it was Rich with a capital R, not the lowercase one he was hoping for. Over the decade, we overcame that beginning and built an extraordinary relationship. Many of those of you who are toasting Rob today are discussing the compelling Convergence vision, bringing people together who have different views to find common ground on issues of national importance. It's the power and the simplicity of that vision that inspired me to do whatever I could over the next decade to support Rob and the terrific Convergence team. But it's really the relationship that Rob and I built over the years that makes this one of the most significant professional and personal experiences of my life. It's been an absolute joy and a real gift to develop such an important and lasting friendship. It's also very unusual to meet somebody at the time, I guess I was about 61, Rob was 60, at that point in your life and still build this deep relationship so easily. Through our work, we developed a very deep mutual respect and trust. And we've been through a tremendous number of ups and downs together. But we've always found a way to maintain a sense of humor, which, as all of you know, is really a prerequisite for any nonprofit leader, especially in these times. Let me just share a couple of brief stories about my relationship with Rob. Rob and I discovered, and I don't know how this happened early on, that we shared a love for not very well-known baseball and basketball players from the 1950s and 1960s. And for years, and continuing to this day, many, if not most of our emails to each other are signed with names that most of you will not have any idea who I am talking about. Names like Sandy Amoros, Joe Adcock, Johnny Antonelli, Larry Siegfried, Dal Maxville, Wes Covington, and so many more. I have absolutely no doubt that Dusie and Akif and the other staff members were absolutely baffled when they were copied on these notes, and I'm hopeful that they Googled these names. And Rob and I do continue that to this day. Dave Lipsky, Rob, and I team taught a course at Cornell for 3 years on collaborative problem solving. And we went into this confident that even if the course wasn't successful, we would have a great time together doing this. The course was successful and we had a great time. It was at a bar one night during this course where I introduced Rob to Grey Goose vodka. I urge all of you, no details are required, but I urge all of you to have a goose some night with Rob and let him just start telling you stories and stories. And if you do a second one, I don't know where he'll go. One was more than enough. One final story. Rob and I were on a fundraising trip in Boston about 6 or 7 years ago. And we were meeting with Richie Slifka, who has been an extraordinarily generous supporter of Convergence from day one. Many of you have never met Richie. I think his comment to Rob was, I'll be happy to support you, but just don't make me come to any meetings or put me on a board. This is my first time meeting Richie, and I thanked him for his extraordinary sustained confidence in our work. And here's the gist of what Richie said to me. When Rob first came to me about Convergence, there was just something about him that made me want to support the work. I liked the guy, his humility, his authenticity, his commitment. To be honest, if I were a betting person, I would have bet that the organization won't be around for more than 2 or 3 years. Well, Richie, your bet on the guy paid off really big time. Rob, many, many thanks for the chance to partner with you over the years and to build a deep and wonderful and loving friendship.
Rich, thank you very, very much. Thanks for adding flavor to the sports lore aspect of Rob's character. And I'm certainly enthusiastic about getting Rob drunk. I mean, I've tried that before, mostly to get more money from him. It hasn't worked out that well. I realized that he actually didn't have it. That was really the key. But thank you again for that. And let us move on to our fourth speaker, Dusie Cassata, who is one of those people who when you learn her role, you certainly start by thinking, oh, very switched on, very focused, very effective. And then you find out, oh, she also does this. Oh, and she does that too. So she does the fundraising, she does the logistics, she does the organizing, she sort of manages staff. She also helps with fundraising. She kind of runs the place. Is that what exactly is Dusie's job? And the answer is pretty much anything that needs tending to, Dusie tends to it in a way that works. And I have had the very great privilege of working with her on a couple of projects where she was completely indispensable. She knows Rob very, very well in some of the most important and difficult work that anyone does in an organizational leadership capacity, which is actually making the organization work day to day. She is currently the Director of Development and Finance at Convergence, although I emphasize that there's more to it than that. And many of you know her, but Dusie, please feel free. Thank you.
Thank you, David. And thank you all for being here today. I miss seeing you in person. So I'm here, as Rob would say, to provide opposing remarks about what it is like to work day in and day out with the visionary others have described. It's obviously been horrible, which is why I decided to stay for 10 years, despite moving away from DC to Chicago and now Oakland. Even though Rob's email inbox remains a Bermuda Triangle that only an intrepid few of us are brave enough to navigate, and our IT company paid us to please find someone else, it will come as no surprise that it's been a pleasure and an honor to work for Rob and to play a part in the Convergence story. Rob as a boss is exactly the way you know him as a friend, colleague, or leader. No matter how serious the world around us gets, Rob brings humor to the day-to-day and hope for the future. In the middle of a meeting, Rob gets this telltale grin on his face, and you know that a dad joke is about to emerge. Since it's been 10 years, chances are good that it's one I've already heard, but it still lightens the mood. Rob calls me Professor Cassata and reminds me to slow down with his ever-ready quip to, mumble that again? I'd been working for Rob for almost 2 years when I nervously asked if we could talk about something. I told him that I wanted to move to Chicago to be with my boyfriend, now husband, but I didn't want to leave Convergence and I hoped he would let me work remotely. Despite my best intentions, I cried. Rob claims he can cry at the changing of a traffic light, so we have this in common. Anyway, Rob was ahead of the times because he said, yes, I could work remotely and we would figure it out. Rob tried to get me to move back to DC every day since he made this fateful decision, but Rob cares about the whole person, so he was willing to make this sacrifice. This caring was not unique to me. Rob took the time to meet one-on-one with every single intern who passed through Convergence and never turned down a request for an informational interview or to give career advice to anyone who asked. And what we were doing here, this honoring of a colleague for his contributions and wishing him well on his next adventure, this is something that Convergence does internally for every person who spends time on staff. It's part of the culture Rob created. I mentioned earlier the hope for the future that is part of working for Rob and Convergence. Our path over the past 10 years has not always been easy. It's the result of a lot of hard work and the generosity of our donors. We all know how humble Rob is and how that has been a hallmark of who Convergence is too. He would jokingly call himself our fearful leader instead of our fearless leader. While he had moments of doubt when that proposal was turned down or that stakeholder didn't want to come to the table, he always returned to his strong belief in the power of bringing people together to solve problems. I know some of the stories like they are my own. I know how Rob met Cherie Harder when they were set up to debate one another and then became friends. I know how Stuart Butler blew everyone away by sharing his support for long-term care coverage for all, even if he might disagree with some on how to do it. I know how the first Project on Nutrition and Wellness meeting was fraught by an op-ed in which a consumer advocate said it was impossible to sit down with food manufacturers. And yet one meeting became many, and all involved were pleasantly surprised with what they were able to discuss and accomplish. I've heard Rob tell these stories, been surrounded by people who've been changed by these experiences, and been buoyed by this evidence of what we already know intuitively to be true. That when you bring people together and help them to get to know one another at a values level, they find they have much more in common than divides them. And what they find in common provides the foundation for strong relationships and shared purpose. Apply this force against almost any problem, and it will result in solutions our skeptic selves thought impossible, in outcomes that are better than any one person or perspective could imagine. It gives me hope for the future. And I know many of you here today feel the same way. It's why I have the pleasure of announcing that together we have raised over $252,000 in Rob's honor so that Convergence can keep doing this work. So we can launch new projects dedicated to America's recovery, drive awareness about the power of bridging divides, and secure Convergence's future. A significant piece of this funding comes from the members of the Founders Circle, a new advisory and giving council we're launching today to help Convergence pursue the next horizon of our work and an enduring testament to what Rob has founded. So to the founding members of the Founders Circle, bear with me, Rich Alper, Hal Beladoff, Neil Bradley, Michael Friedland, David Friedman, Tom Higbee, John Jacob, Steve Kamen, Rich Korn, Paulette Meyer, Jean Molino, David Ross, Howard Rossman, Mary Jo Schuler, Riaz Siddiqui, Richard Slifka, Jeff Weissglass, and Mark Zitter. Thank you so much for your generosity. I also want to thank the many donors who've given generously in Rob's honor, friends, family, colleagues, project stakeholders, former interns, and more. We're sharing a list in the chat of everyone who made a donation. I know that each and every one of these gifts means so much to Rob as it does to all of us at Convergence. So Rob, I just want to say thank you for the past 10 years of humor and hope. Back to you, David.
Wow, Dusie, way to like drop the bombshell here. Thank you so much for sharing those fantastic insights about how Rob mixes vision with warmth and practicality, and how you all have come together, how many of the people on this call have come together to honor him with more support for Convergence. That's just absolutely fantastic. And it is time to give the floor to Rob. Before I do that, I do want to just add a couple of notes from my own experience with Rob. One is, so Oscar Wilde, the English writer, playwright and writer, was known for his unbelievably incisive wit. And he would have people to his house for dinner and make jokes so that they laughed so hard they couldn't eat, while his family sat in stony-faced silence because they had heard it all before. And I have the experience with Rob of having been in so many impossible encounters where I get explained how the person that we're going to meet is the cousin of a guy he played softball with in Poughkeepsie in 1967, who later became friends with the daughter of another friend who's in LA, that it ceased to amaze me, which I actually think is a problem for me because I should still be overwhelmed every time. But I've gone through enough projects with Rob where I get explained how all these people got hooked that I take it in stride. But I just want to underscore the extraordinary quality that Rob has of being able to bring people who are friends into the work of Convergence and to make friends through Convergence's work and to use both sides to make a broader and deeper community over time. And it is an extraordinary power and gift. And I have learned a lot. I do not possess what Rob possesses to make it so, but I'm so happy to be able to be associated with someone who has that gift. And the second thing I want to note about Rob is in the spirit of his vision, how many phone calls or now Zoom calls have started with, you know, Dave, I've been thinking about this problem of US relations with the Muslim world, or how we can really work on economic mobility, which seems to be stuck. And I, Rob, don't know anything about this, but it seems to me that. And all of these conversations have the quality of, I, Rob, who really know nothing, but I just have been thinking it seems like such an important problem. Surely we could get people of goodwill to sit down and work together. And he's playing this as if I'm some kind of expert that he's got to test this idea with. And of course, what I realize is happening is Rob, who has thought a heck of a lot about all of this, but can't resist the aw shucks nature of his own personality and persona, and has to downplay the depth and the wisdom, he's asking me to respond. And basically, I'm a sucker. I always say, Rob, that's a fantastic idea. Let's try and do it. So I am very grateful, as I think others on this call have experienced, to be invited into the vision with such humility, but also with such breathtaking audacity. Because Rob has never shied away, not once, from taking on a really challenging problem, even if it seemed nearly impossible, as long as there was some combination of people and the potential for enough resource to make it a try. And I just hope and pray that the spirit that Rob has brought to this endeavor of Convergences will outlive us all, because our country has big hills to climb, and most of them can only be climbed by coming together. And we need the audacity of the vision along with the humility that Rob has always provided. And I am so grateful to you, Rob, both as a friend, as a professional colleague, and as a citizen of our country, for what you have done and what you continue to do to show that we should never give up that vision, that we should always try, and that we can only find out in the doing. So thank you for that. And let me turn it over to you, Rob.
Well, thank you, David, for that. I guess this is not a good time to announce I'm forming a new organization called Divergence, because I've had a change of heart about what's important. Thank you for your beautiful comments, and thank you to everybody who spoke so beautifully and movingly for me. So I really appreciate it. I've got some prepared remarks. You're right, Dusie, my emotions run close to the surface, so I'm going to try to make them sound spontaneous, but I prepared them so I stay on time and don't well up too often. I must say that this is the most individual attention I've gotten since my bar mitzvah. I feel a little bad for all of you, since we fed everyone that day, and we're not doing that for you, but a lot of people on this call can attest they got fed that day. I want to say thanks to all of you, dear friends, for taking time from your busy lives to participate today. Especially counting all the protesters, we really have quite a turnout. And I want to say thanks to so many of you who sent lovely messages via the Video Hug application. All of you in some way, through your support of Convergence, or me personally, have greatly assisted the mission of Convergence. Though my career continues now in a modified form, this has been the ride of my professional career, and I thank everyone for helping to make this a reality. Thanks to so many of you who have contributed financially to Convergence in recent weeks. I didn't know the total, Dusie, that's amazing. And contributed in recent weeks in relation to my departure as CEO. It means a great deal to me and to the organization. I had totally underestimated how many people would want to give good money to see me leave. I'm a big believer in ceremonies to mark important passages in the lives of individuals and groups. It's nice to be appreciated. So first, I just want to thank, so much effort went into this. I want to thank Dusie and Dawn Collier and Angela Travers and Kayla Sykes, who understood, led the team internally to organize the toast. Thanks to all the speakers, as I said, they were terrific. And I want to acknowledge especially the generosity of spirit of my successor, David Eisner, who enthusiastically supported this event all the way through. The most important takeaway from today is not individual achievement, but what we have all done together. And this is the greatest sort of sense of pride I have, is about bringing people together to work for common purpose and being more of an orchestra leader than a solo performer. Even before Convergence itself got off the ground, the right people always seemed to come along just when we needed them. There are dozens of individuals who, but for their help, either would not have survived or thrived. I don't know where Convergence would be, but for Akif, my dear friend and the talented original partner and co-founder who elevated the work of the organization, and David described him well. The same should be said for our third founding partner, Kelly Young, who I saw was on this before, who later returned after serving as our fundraiser to begin with to brilliantly lead our signature project on K-12 education. I don't know where we'd be without Rich Korn and his unbelievable contributions as organizational coach and as our board chair. We certainly wouldn't be where we are without Dusie Cassata, the one indispensable staff member all these years, doing, as David described, anything and everything we needed. And frankly, we would not have been nearly as successful but for the skill of David Fairman and his co-conspirator at CBI, Pat Field. I saw Pat was on before, and superbly facilitating and partnering in so many of our projects. The same goes for the in-kind and financial support from the law firm Aiken Gump. They literally housed us for free for a while, then for minimal rent, even though eventually we ended up at a storage room. Another story we could tell. And Aiken Gump is so ably represented by our dear friend John Jacob on our board. Special thanks are due some remarkable people who helped me formulate this idea and launch our first effort starting over 20 years ago, most of whom have stayed very active with us since the beginning. They include people like Rob Stein and Kelly Johnston, Cherie Harder, John Steiner, Jessica Dibb, Daniel Bowling, Mark Gerzon, Bill Galston, and others. Thank you very much for setting these ideas in place and mentoring me at the time. There are too many other people to thank that I would prefer to name, but don't have the time to do so individually, although I will name a few people as I go through a few other groups. I want you to especially appreciate the Convergence staff, past and present. Originally, I was going to name all the names, and then I ran out of time. I just want to say to all of you on the call now and all of your predecessors, you've shown such heart and commitment and talent to this cause. And I'm so moved by what you've achieved because you put it on the line every day. And I particularly want to talk about project directors who had such courage that they entered rooms willingly. They had 25 people with very different points of view who they had to accommodate and get to yes. And they've done a remarkable job. I want to thank everybody who served on the board and on the Leadership Council. You've given us your invaluable time, your best thinking, your connections, and you've given generously. And thanks, of course, to so many of you, not officially on the board or Leadership Council, have been active friends and contributors. Thanks also to all the people who hosted events for us in San Francisco and Baltimore, Houston, Chicago, New York, New Jersey, and elsewhere. We would not be here where we are without you. And now I want to just conclude with a few special remarks to thank individuals who've done remarkable things for us. Special thanks to Jean Molino, who not only has been on the board such a long time and so well, but now is doing an extraordinary job as our board chair. Jean, thank you for your comments. I need to tell you how critically important Stuart Butler has been to our success. He has not only been a great board member, but a central conceiver of and participant in many of our most important projects. Stuart, you have taught me so much. Former board member Maya Kristen deserves special praise. Many may be aware of her indispensable and hugely generous philanthropic contributions to us. What you may not know is Maya also served as a remarkable board member, and she played the critical role in building an incredibly valuable West Coast presence for us. Here she had help from people like Rebecca Westerfield, a former board member, Alan Jones, and Don Abramson. I also want to say a special thank you to my dear friends, David Freeman and Paulette Meyer, who put me up at their house in San Francisco maybe a dozen times, making my stays out there a pure joy. I also would be remiss not to recognize several funders who've given us steadfast support. Richie Slifka was already mentioned, he's been great. I also want to give tribute to the Einhorn Family Charitable Trust, now the Einhorn Collaborative, the Stewart Family Foundation, the Hewlett Foundation, the Hellman Family Foundation, and Rockefeller Brothers Fund, among many others, but I want to mention them for their repeated support. And finally, this is where you'll begin to see the Rob Fersh emotions. I want to thank my kids and Sharon for being so supportive of what I've pursued at Convergence. I can't begin to describe what a joy it is to have Rachel as a daughter generally, but also as someone to share this experience with me and for her to contribute so substantively to the work. Sharon is our family rock. She stood by me in 2009 when at the age of 59, in the midst of what was then the greatest economic recession in 70 years, and with several children at various stages of grad school or college, I decided to start a new nonprofit with zero funding in hand. If that's not blind faith, I don't know what is. So a big thank you to all of you for what we've achieved together. Now let me turn to a few thoughts about the present day before I throw the program back over to David Fairman and David Eisner. These are my own thoughts. I no longer, I think, speak for Convergence, so take it for what they're worth, but these are my thoughts about the day. I want to start with a story. In 2002, Mark Roscoe, who actually is in the news again yesterday and today, the former governor of Montana, was chair of the Republican National Committee, and he invited me to tour the RNC headquarters. Never in my wildest imagination did I think I would ever be in this position. I'd been a long-time progressive advocate who had worked in a political position in the Carter administration. I'd worked for Democrats on the staffs of 3 congressional committees, and later led a progressive anti-hunger organization that Ron Pollock founded for 12 years before turning my attention to the field of conflict resolution. At the time, Mark and I were working together along with Larry Bathgate, who's on this call, and others to create the U.S. Consensus Council. Modeled after successful initiatives in Montana and North Dakota, it was designed to actually serve Congress and be authorized by Congress. And the idea was to bring together stakeholders who disagree on big issues where Congress really needed advice and help, and bring them to shared recommendations that Congress could then look at and potentially move forward on, having eliminated the divisions of stakeholders who normally tugged one way or another. So that was the idea of the U.S. Consensus Council. And so it just so happens on that day, prior to my tour of the Republican National Committee, Mark Roscoe and I, along with former Senator, the late Harris Wofford, the liberal icon, met with Senator Joe Lieberman. Lieberman chaired the Senate Governmental Affairs Committee, which had jurisdiction over the bill we had caused to be introduced to establish the U.S. Consensus Council. Lieberman wondered aloud at the meeting what possible cause could have brought Wofford and Roscoe together despite their disparate politics. He heard us out. By the end of the meeting, he agreed to support the bill. Unfortunately, though, the bill made it out of Lieberman's committee. It never got enacted. And that is the main reason I decided to pursue Convergence as an independent nonprofit organization. As we left that meeting on the Senate side, Governor Roscoe said he was walking over to the RNC headquarters and would I like to come along. I said, sure. There was nothing remarkable about the walkover or the tour of the RNC office. There wasn't even special security to keep out a Democrat like me. Something remarkable happened as Mark walked me out the door to say goodbye. We paused out by the street, and Mark said to me, "You can't believe the kinds of materials the RNC staff keeps sending to me, and I keep sending back. The materials say the liberal Democrats this, the liberal Democrats that. If you ever find any kind of statement or appeal coming out from here under my name that is inconsistent with the spirit of what we are trying to do with the U.S. Consensus Council, I want you to call me on it." He was the RNC chair, after all, whose primary task was to win elections for Republicans. Yet he said this. His meaning seemed clear. He did not want to be in the business of either name-calling or dismissing the views of others just because of what group they were part of. What I heard was that he wanted to win people's hearts and minds by the quality and ideas and values this party represented, not through demeaning or stereotyping others who did not belong to it. Mark understood that reasonable people could disagree on a wide range of matters, and that the way to win the argument was with them was on the merits. We have entered what may be the most bruising and polarizing presidential election season of all time. While I do not believe there is equivalence in behavior on both sides, there's no doubt tensions are riding high, charges and countercharges are flying, hyperbole, distortions, and even outright lies occur on a regular basis, whipping too many of us into a frenzy that affects not just how we see the candidates, but how many of us see those who root for the other side. My message today is that we will need to come together, as David Fairman said, as a country, or as Rich said, or maybe both of you said. We need to come together as a country to solve truly urgent problems, starting with the pandemic, the economic collapse, and racial justice. If there's one aspect of Convergence's work that might be underappreciated, it's that we don't just help opposites work together, we take a holistic 360-degree view of the problems we take on. We believe we need all the intelligence of people with differing backgrounds, perspectives, and experience to forge the best possible answers. The creative tension of their differences can push thinking and solutions to a higher level. So I simply want to urge today, as Mark Roscoe did 18 years ago, that we don't dismiss people, sell them short, overgeneralize by saying the Trump supporter is this, or the Biden supporter is that, or the radical left this, or the right wing that. From Convergence's intense experience in the middle of contentious divides, and trust me, they were heated, I believe that most people are decent. Most people are honest. Most people would prefer to get along with others. And most people agree on important goals for the country, but disagree on how to achieve them. They should not be defined solely by what rooting interests they take in an election. I want to be careful here, and I know I'm stepping in some ginger territory, but I don't want to overstate my point. Yes, there are some people and groups that are so extreme in their views, or so intellectually dishonest, or so closed-minded, that it may not be fruitful, even advisable to engage with them. But to a far greater degree than commonly thought, there are opportunities for people with strongly differing views to not only work constructively together, but indeed be friends. Witness Ginsburg and Scalia. While I encourage all of us to be passionate about our beliefs and in our pursuit of social and economic goals and justice, it should not require an abnormal amount of humility to understand that no one person, no one group, and no one ideology has all the answers. We should communicate and collaborate as much as we can, and fight only when we must. And elections do represent a periodic fight we must have. My final comments, and I'll be brief, are about convergence and about Convergence's future. What convergence brings, as Dusie and others said, will be more needed than ever before. If the president is reelected, other leaders in Congress, at the state and local level, in the private and nonprofit sectors and elsewhere, will need to step up to unify the country, since it appears that collaboration really isn't the president's style. All these leaders need help to do so effectively. They need to learn how to collaborate. It's not something you can just talk about and do blindly. You need to have an approach and understanding of how it works. And I would say even if Vice President Biden, who has pledged to bring the country back together, is elected, I have great concerns about whether he and all the people he will bring in have or will pursue skillful means that achieve that vision and resist the impulse to put party over country. All those with similar intentions to Vice President Biden have failed before. We and others in the field have much to offer about how to build genuine alliances and better answers across differences. Given the great need for what we know and do, I could not be more pleased that Convergence now has someone now of the talent, energy, and sensibilities that David Eisner brings to guide the organization forward. He is providing great creativity to maximize our work. He has a great feel for communications, and he has energized everyone around him, including me. David and I have developed a close working relationship, which I treasure, and I'm delighted to still be involved. David and I do disagree from time to time. It's clear to me that when we do, he should actually just defer to me. I am the founder, after all. Not really, just kidding. Of course, we have great discussions and complement each other's skills on strategy. I have deep faith that David, guided by the terrific staff and board, will make great decisions. I feel very optimistic that Convergence will make huge strides to fulfill its potential under David's leadership. I hope that all of you will stay very much involved with us into the future. We need all the heart, intelligence, and generosity you have to offer. I do believe that we can help shift the culture in this country, especially given the new strategic partnerships that David and my colleagues at Convergence are forming with groups whose missions align with our own. I think you all will be impressed when David describes the timely and exciting work we are undertaking. Thanks very much to everyone involved with today. Thank you for coming. Thanks to those who couldn't attend but have sent their good wishes. I want to thank you for this once-in-a-lifetime career experience and for this wonderful event. I will be forever grateful.
Rob, thank you. I'm just so, again, And I know that all of us are so, again, as always, moved by the fact that you always lead with gratitude and with that generosity of spirit, that you so clearly and articulately raise up the challenge and the opportunity for our country, and that you so clearly and compellingly make the case for Convergence and for its leadership as it makes the transition to David Eisner. And we are also lucky to have you in whatever role you play during and past this moment of transition on every level. So please don't go anywhere. And not only don't go anywhere, but sit still, because now we just have to do a couple more things. The first is that Sharon, or at least the stunt double playing Sharon, is now going to execute a complicated maneuver and to offer you a gift and tribute from Convergence. And while she is doing that, and maybe Sharon, you're holding it up for everyone to see the beautiful atomic mass that is there, can I invite everyone to unmute yourselves? And if you've got a beverage of any kind, I'm actually,
There it is.
I must say that I came prepared. If you've got something, really anything at all, and you can do the mime version of it if you like. Let's raise a toast to Rob. I would also, sorry, thank you. Sorry to be so abrupt, but moving the show along, I hope you don't mind. David Eisner, the new president and CEO of Convergence, who's been here since April 1st, which is a wonderful cosmic, I won't say joke, a cosmic reminder of what I would describe as the sainted foolishness of all of us who want to make the world a better place. David is, I have gotten the pleasure of interacting quite a bit with David over the last couple of months, and he is truly gifted in his ability to see opportunity. He understands the work and the mission of Convergence. He brings his own perspective. He brings many years of experience in the public, private, and nonprofit sectors. If you don't know him and don't know his bio, please have a look. Please be in contact with him. Please give him your ideas and your support. He is wide open, welcoming, and a lot of fun to talk to. So let me, with no further ado, give it to you, David Eisner. Thank you.
Thank you so much, David. You are an extraordinary facilitator and a great friend to Convergence. And thanks to everyone who joined us today, to the many of you who contributed gifts so generously, and to the wonderful testimonials in Rob's honor. I hope everyone will join me in thanking our incredible team that organized today's event, especially the inimitable Dusie, Cassata, Don Collier, Angela Travers, and Kayla Sykes. But most importantly, Rob, thanks to you. Rob, you have created truly an amazing organization, and you've endowed us with a methodology, a perspective, a staff, and a set of accomplishments that really position us perfectly to make a very powerful and important contribution to America in this precise moment. Before I go further, I want to share something many of you may not know. Rob and I share way too many similarities for it just to be coincidence. So for example, what David just said about my starting on April 1st, believe it or not, Rob started on April 1st, 11 years ago, making us both April Fools. We both have 4 kids. Without knowing it, we were both long-term members of the same congregation in Bethesda. We share similar starts on Capitol Hill. We have a similar love-hate relationship with golf. We have multiple Sharons in our lives. But I need to share that there are also key differences. In particular, I can't tell you how many meetings I've been to where my role is to play the straight man to Rob's hilarious and dry sense of humor. However, even though I do sometimes feel a bit unfunny when I'm next to you, Rob, I want to share that in every other way, you have been extraordinarily generous. You've been a sensitive leader and founder in welcoming the new guy. I need to share that from my perspective, two of the exceedingly difficult tasks that I need to accomplish in order to succeed at Convergence are these. First, it's really a challenge to institutionalize the DNA of our organization. That comes directly from Rob's heart and his brain. And that's the DNA that makes our Convergence dialogues so successful. And institutionalizing that is hard and ongoing work. My second task, which is also both a challenge and a joy, is to jump into the hundreds of deep and meaningful relationships that Rob has assembled over the decades. And this includes relationships with many of you, as I've come to know from one meeting after another with many of you. You are essential to Convergence, and you're essential to our being the organization we are today and becoming the organization we'll be in the future. And speaking about the future, one of the ways that Rob is the most generous with me is that he puts great amounts of time and energy and wisdom into how Convergence faces our future. Today, we're dedicating our work to projects that aim to provide solutions to the most pressing issues facing America's recovery. And these are issues which will face us for many years to come. This is the moment that Convergence was created for. And the person who created Convergence and all we stand for is helping us meet that challenge. New projects include a Convergence dialogue on economic recovery for America's workers, and a Convergence dialogue on guns and suicide preventions. More projects are coming in 2021. Our projects have expanded our focus and capacity to lift up issues of race and equity across our dialogues and across the organization. We're building out a hub of collaborative problem solving in California, which is based on the strong success of a test that Rob ran, established in California a couple of years ago. And we're leading a movement, as Rob referred to it, of partnering with many of the other organizations that focus on bringing Americans together to heal our country. And we're bringing the Convergence model to other organizations and to local communities. And I need to say that every single one of the CEOs to whom I've reached out has shared that an important reason they're interested in partnering with Convergence is because of their deep respect for Rob and for the work he's done. I don't think it's an overstatement to say that America needs Convergence and the vision we've absorbed from Rob now more than ever. And we are on an amazing upward slope to meeting that moment. Rob, thank you for allowing me to be here, and thank you for bringing all of us together for this valuable work. But Rob, I got to tell you, you got one thing wrong in your comments earlier. You will always, always speak for Convergence. Thanks. David, back to you.
Thank you so much, David. And thank you for reminding us that that the work is actually supercharged in this moment, and that the energy at Convergence is absolutely in the spirit of commitment to going through this difficult phase and helping our country find its footing economically, socially, politically going forward. We are just about wrapped up. I only want to note in closing that I think today is a wonderful microcosm of the spirit and the action and the fruits of Rob Fersh's labors with Convergence. If you look at the range of people on this call and those who have spoken and those who have contributed in the chat, you will see that we have the full gamut, from those who've known Rob since he was a young man, his family and close friends, to those who've met Rob in the last year or two. That we go the gamut from those who've been deeply involved in many Convergence projects to those who have just touched the work. And that in that intersection, we still find that Rob has managed to convince each and every one of us that there is something so remarkable and precious here that we want to celebrate him, we want to celebrate it, we want to contribute to the organization that takes it forward, we want to contribute above all to the spirit and the vision that Rob stands for and personifies. And I'm so grateful to all of you for giving us all the opportunity to appreciate this together and to be together. And I only encourage you to stay in touch with each other, know that Convergence is a family, and be part of the family taking this forward. I want to let you know as we wrap up now that we are going to keep the Zoom open for another 15 minutes or so. Rob is happy to stay and to chat with people informally. Obviously, if everyone stays on, those are going to be pretty short chats, but feel free to stay and to try to connect. Use the chat if you like. And if you need to go now, go. Thank you so much for having been here with us. And Rob, again, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. So appreciated.